Episode 18 of Sir Ulrich Hosts Money Matters. We are on the other side of the Bitcoin conference of 2024. And the first episode back, I have the privilege of introducing Adam O, who is the business dev manager for Upstream Data. Adam, how's it going today, bro?
It's going awesome, man. I'm glad to connect with you. This is exactly what I wanted to do this weekend was, sit down, take it easy, talk about some exciting stuff during one of the, harshest times ever in the mining industry.
We're going to get into that.
Yeah.
We're going to get into that. I didn't really have that in the forecast. Talk to me. Why is it some of the harshest times for miners? Describe that to the audience.
That's a tough game, right? Like it's effectively the thing about Bitcoin mining, in my opinion, right, is that it's one of the best metrics of demand, right? I say it often. I think, hash rate, hash power is demand. And I say that because, the demand to produce Bitcoin is a much deeper and, in my opinion, more dense or powerful metric of demand. Because if you think about it, conceptually, pragmatically, it's pretty straightforward. You can log on to a River, a Swan, a Strike, and buy $100 or $1,000 of Bitcoin. Doesn't take much conviction, right? But to buy hardware and to gain access to megawatts or dozens of megawatts of power is serious long-term sticky demand, right? And so there's typically this lag period, and we saw it in end of 2020 to into 2021, right? Price blows out mining competition, and everybody on earth is incentivized to bring on as much hash rate as possible, as fast as possible. And the thing about these miners is they're effectively commodities, right? And we're approaching this kind of flattening efficiency gain on a per unit basis. So it's quite predictable how much power needs to come online for, say, like the network to double. And it's gigawatts, it's thousands of megawatts of power gen, which doesn't happen overnight, right? Like that takes 16, 18 months, like best case scenario for 100 megawatt kind of a project. And so everybody's running to get that done. They finance it the moment that the numbers look good, but then there's this delay, right, where the hash rate doesn't come online. And what's funny is it starts coming online right as maybe price is correcting. And so then there's like this just piercing, dual variable working against you, right? Competition's going up, price is going down, hash price is getting squeezed. But in the meantime, we saw 16 months in a row, 16 consecutive months of hash price over 15 cents, right? Which is 3 times higher than where it is right now. And what we've seen recently is, I think, a lot more savvy mining. This is a global game, right? Like I think if you're not very creative, if Bitcoin mining is your primary business, you need to be the most creative and you should be the most scared, right? Like you need to be the absolute best. I think Bitcoin mining is best suited as a secondary or tertiary part of your business model. Like our customers at Upstream Data, right? Their primary business model is producing hydrocarbons. It's producing oil and gas. They mine Bitcoin because it's a means by which to increase their operational efficiency as a hydrocarbon producer. Or a multi-acre greenhouse, right? Like they want to maximize their crop yield, supplementing heat into the facility is part of that process. So they mine Bitcoin in order to offset a liability, offset a cost, the cost of adding heat. And so they're happy to mine at a loss, right? Like if they can reduce that liability, but if on the margin, even if on the margin they're spending 10 cents to make 8, if at the end of the year they still reduce that cost of heating this greenhouse for their primary business, they're jumping up and down excited about mining Bitcoin, right? And so like as time goes on, more people become educated, aware. I mean, that's part of my job, right? Is I'm constantly educating people on a lot of guys on why they're already in a position to be the best Bitcoin miner. They just don't really know it yet. Like I'm trying to enlighten them to how well positioned they are. And, with the more time that goes on, the less risky this idea of, producing magic internet money becomes. it's no longer niche, right? It's no longer kind of off the wall, right? Like ERCOT projects are happening, right? Like there's big public billion-dollar companies, but this is not totally crazy anymore. So I think it's a combination of savvy producers and committed demand, right? And what we see today is we're at like what 5.3 cent hash price, maybe even lower, 5.1, 4.9. And that's all time. Like we're right about all-time lows. We're maybe
Right.
6% above all-time lows. And so this is the most competitive mining has ever been. It's like the toughest it's ever been. Strangely enough, I find it to be one of the highest times of demand. Like I'd say the last 120 days, I've had insane amounts of inquiries inbound, and not just interest, but like committed, pulling the trigger, buying infrastructure from those who are mining Bitcoin as a secondary or tertiary part of their business. So and again, that's because they're very hash price insensitive. They're much more capital intensity sensitive, where the upfront capital risk, the nominal capital risk, is what keeps them at bay. And just so the inverse, because the market is so tough, hardware is cheap, right? Like miners they've never been cheaper on a terahash basis. And so for them, it's a great time to capitalize and a great time to take marginal risk and prove this out. And like I think we're seeing a lot of that. And then I think public companies are just trying to, they're upgrading, they're leveraging their scale, their financing, and we're going to see a lot of hash rate come on just from that, right? So it's interesting times for sure.
You mentioned, I've heard a statement, or I've heard both sides of the statement, that everyone should be a miner. Everyone should be going down the Bitcoin rabbit hole and become a miner and mine their own Bitcoin, no KYC sats. But then I've heard other people, and it may have been Barber, it may have been yourself, or it may have been someone else, saying, if you don't know what you're doing, or if you're not like a professional miner and you don't have this infrastructure and this plan, you should stay the hell away. What side of the spectrum do you fall, or is there a happy medium? What are your thoughts on those dynamics?
I land on both. I land on both sides of that spectrum. I'm conflicting, right? I guess. I'd say if you don't have access, if you're not able to secure marginally economic energy or power, right? It needs to be more marginally economic energy, like natural gas, because you then need to convert it to power, right? Which takes additional cost, additional risk, additional operational considerations and operational risk and cost. If you happen to have access to economic clean power, like economic grid power, you're a farmer in Kentucky who has, maybe you're subsidized simply by the fact that you're an agricultural operation, right? You're growing food. You're already getting like 5-cent power from, the utility because of your profile as a consumer. Like this is something you should absolutely be learning about. And like, at least you should have an intimate understanding of the risk profile and be able to, intelligently describe why you're not participating, like why you've decided to deploy capital elsewhere because you're getting a better return, or a better profile. If you're just an everyday person, I think it's dangerous to one thing I've said to guys is, get yourself like a serious Bitcoin position before you go out and spend a bunch of money on hardware. If that's the game you want to play. I think like the first time you take capital risk on mining hardware as an individual, it should be like less than 5% of your total Bitcoin position, right? So like if you're going to spend 3 million sats, like you should have at least like 3/4 of a coin, right? Like have it be very marginal and be low time preference. Like me myself, like I have not the greatest power. I'm at like 10-cent kind of power, which on a retail basis in the United States is quite good. It's below average. I think average is like maybe 14 or something. But it's not like killer attractive. I love mining as one of means by which to just like dollar cost average there's some KY free advantages to that. It's an immutable way. Like I feel like it's always going to be just, maybe 24 hours from now that we see crazy regulations on exchanges. They're going to make you digitally sign that you're taking custody of this Bitcoin. So there's no arbitrary aspect of like where you're sending it. All these very Orwellian and honestly like invasive kind of regulations that only do more harm than good. Just because they're bad regulations doesn't mean they won't happen. In fact, it's probably a greater likelihood. And so having the ability to turn power into Bitcoin, I think is just advantageous. Like having a machine that does this it's a valuable piece of hardware. And the other side of it is, you get a 60-day float, if not more, right? People don't think about this, but like I've been heating my home for 6-7 years by mining Bitcoin. And, I'm mining using the heat in Colorado 7 months out of the year to keep my house warm. And I'm earning on them like daily, right? And my power bill comes at the end of the month. And I have like 30 or 45 days to pay that power bill. I mean, that's like a 60, 75-day interest-free credit loan to buy Bitcoin. Like that's hard for me to not take advantage of, like with Bitcoin's price volatility, hell, in 75 days, we could be talking about a whole entire different market. We could be talking about, a type of appreciation that is beyond worthwhile. And I'm very low time preference when it comes to mining. I don't have a ton of personally, I don't have a ton of hash rate. I didn't take an insane amounts of risk on hardware. I've been ruthlessly savvy. I've got the connections. That's the good news is I'm very involved in this industry. And so, I've been obsessed with the hardware pricing for a long time now. And, I know when something's well priced. I happen to have people come to me when they're desperate and be like, hey man, do you know anybody that's looking to buy this? And I'm always like, I might, like what's the price? And so like I've done well in minimizing the risk of the hardware I've got. And my goal is to run them, to try to make these machines. Like I want to be the guy that's running an M30 plus for a decade, right? I want to be able to see if I can make it last that long. I want to underclock it. I want to see if this thing can just trickle along. It's like, it's like 150, 175 bucks a month or something, right? And like power costs, it's, for a single kind of machine. I've got a couple, not a big deal. And so, I love doing that. Like I think there's also this, I think buying Bitcoin and taking custody of it is the key. Like if you're just out there buying it, or if you're buying ETFs, I don't know if you're having really any upward impact on price. Like I don't even know if you're part of the market. I go back and forth on that, but I think it's likely that you're kind of, you're just throwing your money at an exchange, and whether or not they have the Bitcoin, they're fully, nobody knows, right? And I think in that situation, it's wise to defer to the likelihood that they're not fully reserved, right? That they could have a bank run. Like if right now everybody on Coinbase withdrew all their Bitcoin that they had, nominally in their account, like would those be met? I don't know. Like
FTX 2.0.
Well, and like again across the board. I mean, FTX was stupid. Like they were talking about. I mean, they were like fully criminal. They were doing the Binance model where they were leveraging their own token, right? And they were going out and getting loans with their own token. And so their whole game was propping up their own token. They didn't like having a bank run on Bitcoin was the least of their concerns. Their biggest concern was like pumping up this, BS security they created out of thin air. Right. So like that's like the second order magnitude was a bank run on Bitcoin that like they weren't even concerned about because they had all these other issues. And that's what I mean is like that's how crazy and greedy a lot of these exchanges get. And so, buying and taking custody, while that's huge, I think mining and not selling is even bigger, right? Like I pride myself on having just utterly ancient UTXOs straight from mining pools, straight from Coinbase. That Coinbase meaning the blockchain Coinbase, not the company. That heck, I was listening to one of that guy that does all the on-chain analytics. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. He like
Willy Woo.
It wasn't Willy Woo, it was one of the other guys. But
Mm.
they were doing all their on-chain analytics. You know, they're doing their like the realized market cap stuff, and they were talking about how like these 6+ old UTXOs, they're likely lost or whatever. And I was like, dude, I got like a ton of 6+ year old. Like you guys are completely underestimating how insane we are. Like your assumptions are flawed, sir. And they didn't want to hear it. Like I'm in the
6 years
comments,
and they
like,
thought it was lost.
yeah.
Oh my
Well,
gosh.
yeah,
not
they
even,
were like
bro.
they were like attributing some likelihood, right? They're like, well, this has
Mhm.
an X% likelihood of being lost, or you know, never to move again. And I'm like, you guys are like, for all we know, Satoshi Nakamoto's coins could move tomorrow. Right? We don't
That's
know
right.
that he's gone. It's just
That's right.
there's a fair bet that like somebody with that amount of wealth would move it by now, but we don't know. I mean, we're talking about an individual who created this thing. Like, you know, I mean, I don't think that's
Especially
a
when you
high
consider
likelihood,
this,
but
like when you consider the inventory model of first in or last in, first out. You know, there's a lot of people who's like, and they're planning the way they interact with their UTXOs just to make it look more, especially back then. Like if they had this forward thinking mindset, you know what? Those early sats that I got, I'm just going to let them chill. And maybe the ones I get in the next cycle, maybe I'll let them be my more liquid stack. You know, it's like, you don't know, like these people were so brilliant back in the 2010 era, 2011, and it's like for
I think
people
I
to
think it's rare. Like I think there's
yeah,
very few that were like that had that foresight. I think
okay, yeah,
I mean you might be right, but like and I think there was definitely I think a few. I think
mhm.
I think the crazy ones came like 2014 to 2016, 17, even maybe
Yeah,
18 kind of
okay.
area
When they
because
had
because
a
they had
cycle
seen
and
it.
a half to cite to see what exactly is this thing, what is it,
Right.
what's
Like if you were in
happening, is
2011,
it a
it was
cycle or
like,
not? Yeah,
yeah, like in 2011, like
that's true.
$20,000 Bitcoin was like there was very
Not
few guys
happening.
that had that conviction, right?
Right.
Very few, like, you know, Antonopoulos,
How?
probably Adam Back, like, you know, guys that really understood what they were dealing with.
Hmm.
The majority of us weren't even enlightened to this reality yet, right?
Nope.
And so, but like I'll say for me, like I've never sold a single sat that I've mined, right? And I started
Very
mining
nice.
early 2018, right? So like that's something I will. I mean, you know, my dad and I started a company that was part of the language of our partnership was like we had at least like a 9 to 12 year, like
Time
9-year
horizon.
minimum hold. And we
Hmm.
did have an asterisk in there, like barring some, you know, nightmarish like family liquidity issue, right?
Act of God, or
Emergent, yeah, like
yeah,
like
emergency.
emergency. This is like the only money left that you know we as a family have. Then we would do that. But barring that scenario, it's like minimum this. And so like that was one of the wisest things we did. But like intentionally, I was like the stuff we mine, you know, we also bought a bunch of Bitcoin. Like we padded a treasury, right? We just took capital risk. And anytime we had expenses where we were going to use Bitcoin, we always pulled from that which we had a capital risk on, like that which we bought, not what we mined. And so
Hmm.
it's really cool, right? Like it's really cool to have a UTX or like, you know, to have a UTXO set that has something like 500 ins and no outs, you know, at a single address kind of a thing. It's wild. It's strange. Like I was, you know, my dad was a utter skeptic. I forced him more or less just by annoying him, you know, endlessly. And finally he was like, okay, like shut up. Like just to shut you up, we're going to do this. And he told me straight up, he was like, Adam, I was certain that money was lost. He's like, I wrote it off. I thought it was going to be an expensive lesson. And now he's a total Bitcoin bull. So, you know, it's funny how time is the ultimate game changer. And that's on Bitcoin's side, right? That's where Bitcoin really, it overcomes people. It overcomes the craziest, you know, skeptics and even the harshest criticisms. Time is what usually proves them all to be fools. I mean, even Michael Saylor, right? Like we can go back to that tweet that he had where he was like, I think it's, you know, it's nothing.
2019,
Like,
2018
well, and
or
like,
something.
yeah, I think it was, yeah, whatever. Yeah, it was maybe 2017 or 2018. And, you know, time got him, right?
Right.
He had the, you know, props to Michael Saylor for having the intellectual honesty and character to humble himself and say like, hey, I was wrong. Like that's the hardest part for most people, is to admit like, one, I was wrong, because then they have to come to terms with the opportunity cost, right? Where like they could have done the easiest thing, just bought this thing and done nothing. And they would have crushed all their, AI analytic, S&P 500, blah, 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 blah nonsense. They have to come to terms with the fact that they overcomplicated something very simple. They overlooked something seemingly obvious in hindsight, right? Mining in the oil field, mining on flare gas. You talk to people about that today, and it's like, duh, like this is, it was not obvious. Okay. I lived it. It was not obvious. I was laughed out of rooms. I was literally laughed out of dinners at NAPE. It was dumb. It was insane. It was foolish. It was laughable. And then all of a sudden in hindsight, everybody's like, oh yeah, duh. Like, of course mining's going to happen. It's like, no, this was not duh. Like this was very much radical at this moment in time. Fast forward 3-4 years, it's seemingly obvious, right? It's like, well, yeah, that's one of Bitcoin's key features. It rescues, stranded and waste energy.
Stranded energy. That's right.
Like,
that's
wasn't obvious.
No, that is, what a brilliant like breakdown of all these different facets of how you stayed the course, had low time preference, impacted your father's worldview. And I kind of want to get more into who you are, especially with your current job with Upstream. You work for a company that's based in Canada, Alberta, for that specifically, and your Twitter is at Denver Bitcoin. So you live close to Mile High Stadium, Alberta, Canada, somewhere mid Canada. How did this relationship come to be? And talk about what your role is with the company, and how you met Steve Barber and all of that. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, like for sake of geography, right? So I'm a little bit outside of Denver. You're right. I'm maybe 35 minutes away or something. And Upstream's headquarters, I think it's about 950 miles directly north of me, like almost a straight shot. It's right on the border of Alberta, Saskatchewan, a town called Lloydminster, which is, I always tell people it's like the Midland, Texas of Canada. It's like oil and gas town, oil and gas epicenter. Alberta's the Texas of Canada, if there is one, and Lloydminster is the Midland in a way. And so, I was working in oil and gas. I fell kind of backwards into a pretty big oil and gas role for a very small production accounting software company. So, the founder of this company stumbled upon me. He needed somebody young and, energetic and ambitious, willing to learn, to go out and actively sell this accounting software that they had developed over the last decade. They had a couple, they were a healthy company, no debt. They had a few customers. They were making good money. They only had like 3 or 4 employees. But he was like, I'm too tired. I can't go to trade shows. I don't want to carry all the gear. He's like, I need somebody to do that. And I was like, okay, well, I don't know anything about oil and gas. So I was like, but, I'm absolutely willing to learn, and it sounds like a good opportunity. The office was like 0.3 miles from my house. So that was awesome. And I had a lot of autonomy. I was going to get to travel. I was going to get to learn. And so in the midst of that, I fell in love with oil and gas production. I absolutely just fell in love. Like every aspect I would, learn more about, I became more enamored with either the complexities, the difficulties. I mean, oil and gas is on the absolute edge of technological development. I mean, it's as complex and insane as like aerospace technology. I would even argue going to space is easier than going, 3 miles down into the crust of the earth and 2 miles lateral or whatever. Right. And so it's not this archaic industry that I, being a layman, kind of thought of, right? I kind of thought of like oil and gas being more legacy, not cutting edge, not new. It certainly shattered those expectations. And in the early days of me trying to sell the software product, I was terrible at it. There was 2 reasons. One, I didn't really understand what I was selling. Okay. And I'm a pretty good biz dev guy. I'm a pretty good salesman, but the oil and gas industry, I mean, the guys I was dealing with, they had one hell of a nose for bullshit. Like you cannot BS these guys, right? They smell it on you in a moment. And they were smelling my bullshit like right away. So I went back to my bosses and I was like, guys, I need to like intimately understand this software product, why it's valuable, because I can't fool these guys, right? I can't fool these engineers. I can't buzzword them, right? And so my bosses put me in charge of doing actual, like, real world oil and gas production accounting every month for multiple companies that we were doing that for. They were outsourcing to us. And so I was getting grease books, the daily data capture from wells would come into me from various sources. I would input it into this software product. I would measure the oil, gas, and water, the on lease, the sales gas, the flare gas, right? And my bosses were very patient with me. They taught me about what drilling a vertical well looks like, what hydraulic fracturing is, what perforation is, what casing and tubing, all this stuff, right? Like, and they were very patient, and they whiteboarded me, and they made me smart. And in the midst of that, I happened to get curious about mining Bitcoin. Just like one day sitting in the office, I saw the mining death spiral news article, which is a sexy title, right? Like the Bitcoin mining death spiral. And I was like, I bet Bitcoin's a scam. Right? Like that was my instinct. I was like, I bet this thing's a scam. And I understood central banking very well. That's what I studied in college, right? I did economics and econometrics and stuff. And so, like, I knew central banking was a scam, but I was like, I figure this is another, scam to some degree. And it's likely that whoever's producing it is scamming the rest of these individuals. So I was like, I bet you I can go put my finger on how this is a scam. I bet you I can, intelligently explain it to myself why this is a rigged game. And so I went to, just curiosity, I went to go learn how Bitcoin was produced, because I figured that's where, the crux was. And very quickly I understood that this was not a game that could be rigged, right? I knew you couldn't rig a kilowatt hour. I knew you couldn't rig a barrel of oil, right? You can't cheat that. You can't dilute it with water, and like there's viscosity, and there's gravity, and there's MMBTUs, right? There's a specific amount of energy, potential energy in a barrel of oil. Same thing with a kilowatt hour, a BTU, right? So I knew that game couldn't be, it couldn't be unfairly rigged. You can have advantages and things, but they come at cost. They come with trade-offs. They come with work. Once I understood that computing had thermodynamic law attached to it, right? That that the ways in which thermodynamic law related to computational work and to, computer engineering. And in other words, no matter how efficient a computer gets, you can't get a circuit or a computer to execute functions without at least, non-zero amounts of energy. And in fact, it's quite measurable. Even the most efficient, supercomputer, blah, 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 it does a quadrillion computations or hashes. You divide that by the amount of energy consumed, and it's non-zero, right? It can't be free. And so upon understanding that, I realized really quickly this was an open and competitive energy market. And I was in the midst of, I knew specifically where there was tons of natural gas that was being wasted. And, I'd been enlightened to what stranded gas was. I knew why, this gas was being flared or shut in. And it was just simple economics, right? The cost to bring it to market was unattractive, right? If you spend $10 to make $5, nobody's going to do that. So they burn it off. They're producing oil. They're not going to stop producing oil. It's very lucrative. They're not going to shut down $1 million a year well, right? Just because they can't sell the gas, they'll just burn the gas. And so, at the same time, I'm looking at these spreadsheets and looking at our software, and I'm seeing this company over here is making $5,000 a day on this gas, and this company over here has the same amount of gas, and they're just burning it. And I'm like, $5,000 a day? That's like what, $1.7 million a year? Why are they burning? And I was like, I wonder what it would take to mine Bitcoin, right? I knew nothing about about running those numbers. And so I was calling Generac and generator companies, and I was like, how much does this engine cost? How much fuel does it consume? And they'd say things like, are you talking about at half load or prime power or continuous? And I'm like, shit, I don't know what that means. So then I have to go figure out what that means. And then I come back, and then I got to a point where I had confidence in the numbers, and they weren't get rich quick, but they were super attractive. Like they absolutely competed with pipeline, which I knew those numbers very well. And I was like, oh my God, this is going to happen. Like I wonder if, and I couldn't find anybody talking about this. I couldn't find anybody doing it. I Googled about it. I couldn't find nothing. And so I set up some Google alerts. It's a scary thing when you think that you're the first guy to have an idea, like at a good idea. right? Like, I mean, there was like a month where I was like, I think I might be the only guy thinking about this. Like that's horrifying, because if you don't do something and then somebody else does, you'll never live with yourself, right? And so like I started getting like sleepless. Again, I was bringing this up to my bosses. They were laughing at me, open mouth laughing at me. Okay, it was like this, oh yeah, you've been in the oil and gas industry 5 months, and you're gonna come and solve this, decades long problem of stranded gas with this magic internet money. Yeah, okay, all right. And I mean, they were a lot smarter than me, a lot wiser than me, and their laughter was probably warranted. But I was like, okay, they're laughing, and then like I'd go back to the numbers, and I'm like, but I think the number like is there, like so. Anyway, I got a Google alert in, I think it was like mid-June of 2018. And the Google alert was nonsense. Whatever I triggered, it didn't give me any quality. But one of the related, it said like related search terms or related topics. And it said Upstream Data. And I was just curious. And I just clicked on it. And it brought me to the like basic HTML web page that Steve had built himself. Like, like probably like on his laptop in his bed at night, like doing basic, like basic formatting coding and like copying basic, websites, and then just putting in, his logo and his name and stuff. And I read the website and I was like, oh my God, like, first of all, this is exactly what I've been thinking about. And I was like, second of all, this guy was doing it like 2 years ago. He was in the oil field proving it to himself. And he's a petroleum engineer. Like he's mountains, he's miles and light years ahead of me in terms of understanding oil and gas. And he's effectively a veteran to this space. He has credibility in the oil and gas world in a way that I didn't, right? He's a petroleum engineer. He's worked for oil and gas companies, and I could tell he was an absolute like patent, he's an engineer, right? So he always finds stuff that he thinks he can improve and design differently. And he like a good engineer, he goes and patents it, and then he moves on, right? And so when I saw this website, it just blew my mind. And I pulled up the sales at Upstream Data or whatever. And I was like, hey man, I think what you're doing is going to change the world. And I just like poured my guts out. And I was like, can we talk on the phone? Can we get on a call? And he was like, yeah, let's hop on a call. Like he was totally casual. And we got on a call, and he was the first person, Steve was the first person I talked to that didn't laugh, that didn't think this was stupid. He was like, no, it's happening. He's like, it's going to happen. It's going to disrupt the hell out of oil and gas. He's like, it's very early. He's like, I'm still figuring it out. Like, he's like, but I was like, can I come? I was like, can I work for you? He's like, I can't hire you. Like I have 0 employees effectively. So I can't just hire some random guy to Colorado. I was like, okay, well, can I invest with you? And he's like, I'm not looking to dilute myself. I'm not looking for capital. Shit. Well, can I be a customer? He's like, yeah, I'll build you an engine. I was like, okay, so I'm going to go get capital. I'm going to come back. I'll call you. And I did. And when I called him back and said, hey, I want to be a customer, my primary goal was to have the same conversations I'd been having for months and months, which was, hey, I think, if you've got stranded or waste gas, I think you should be mining Bitcoin. It's going to totally disrupt this game. And then I get laughed at and I kind of walk away. But I wanted the number, like if I had the proof, right? If I showed that, like, look, I bought an engine for this much and electrical distribution for this much, and I'm consuming this much vent gas, and this is what I'm earnings, then I would say it. They'd laugh at me and I'd go, okay, that's funny, right? But look, like, here's the numbers. This is what I risk. I'm doing it. Here's a picture of my thing. Like, look, it's a nice picture. Like, here's a video, right? And then they would have to shut up. Like that was my theory, that they would stop laughing, and they did. And that's what. So then I called Steve back when my unit was got built. I was like, hey man, can you hire me? He's like, no. So, damn it. I was like, well, can I at least go try and sell? Like, can I work for you for free? It's effectively what I asked him. And he was like, yeah, like, of course you can. He's like, if you want to go try and sell our stuff, I will, if you're successful and somebody comes to us and, gives us money or whatever, he's like, I'll give you a little kickback. I'll throw you a small percentage or something. And I was like, that was enough for me. I was like, done. So then I started busting my ass for free. And now I had the data. I could combat the laughter. I had some real like stuff that engineers couldn't laugh at. Like they laugh, and then I'm like, but here's a picture, right? And then they're like, oh shit, like really? I'm like, yeah. And then I could show them like Upstream Data's website. I'm like, this guy's doing it. He's a petroleum engineer. He's much more credible than me, right? Like you can talk with him. And it was still hard. Like they still laughed. They still were like, yeah, right. A lot of people would hang up. I'd call them and be like, hey, I want to talk to you about any flare stranded gas you've got. And I think a lot of them thought I was like the EPA. Like I was like trying to like come get him in trouble for their their waste, right? And like literally was like, I want to talk to you about this. I think you can possibly monetize it. Just click. Like so many times. I was just like, damn it. Like I'd write them down and it would be like follow up in 9 days. Like I'll call these guys again. And I just was ruthless about it. And then, I did that enough to where it was December of 2020, November, December of 2020. And I called Steve and I said, hey man, I've got like 5 oil and gas producers who are very serious. I've already had 10 conversations with them and now they want to talk with you. And because they want to actually talk about like, the specific numbers and stuff. Like I wasn't working for Steve. I didn't know exactly what his current iteration cost, right? What engines he was using. Like I inevitably just needed to qualify them as much as possible and then pass him low hanging fruit. And I was like, I've got like 4 or 5 of these guys. I was like, can we set up some calls next week or, early January after the holidays and, get these guys kind of, fed to you. And he was like, man, I've been meaning to call you and I think I can bring you on full time because a lot of people have been coming to me lately saying that they're talking to this random guy out of Denver and it's you. And I was like, literally, I was like, I remember exactly where I was standing. Like when this call happened, I was like, really? He's like, and of course he couldn't bring me on it very much. Steve wasn't going to take a bunch of risk on somebody that I wasn't fully proven, but I'd proven a fair amount of work and I didn't care. I mean, he could have lowballed me harder than he did. And I'd have been like, done. Cause I did good at selling software. I did good at selling software in the oil and gas industry to guys. And software is the worst thing to sell in the oil and gas industry. It just costs money. Like it doesn't really, at least drilling software and stuff that like helps you find oil can be like really beneficial. I was doing accounting software. Like this like maybe makes some overhead less painful.
Overhead. Yeah.
It's just like, it's like the least sexy, hardest job ever. And I was pretty good at it. And I was like, man, you give me like, talk about taking the weight off the bat. Like you let me go sell something that makes these guys money, that like monetizes that which they can't monetize. Like that's the job. Like selling this sucks. I want to go do this. And so when he gave me an offer, it was like January to start, I think like February 1st of 2021. I jumped for joy. Like right when I got off the phone with him, I like called the landlord. I'm moving out. Like I'm done here. I'm going to my own place. I was like, I need a full space where I can talk all day and I can't be bothered. Like I made all these moves. I'd already quit my job. I'd been unemployed for about 10 months at this point. I'd been burning savings. I was unemployable. Like I was so obsessed with this idea. I was a terrible employee. Like I worked in radio for a minute because I needed to raise capital to buy a unit from Upstream. Right. So I got into this better job and I was terrible. I was a terrible employee because I was distracted all day. Right. Like I couldn't focus on my job. Even if I wanted, like, I just didn't want to, I didn't care enough. And so I just walked away from that at one point and I was like, I'm either going to go broke trying to make this into a career, or I'm going to make this into a career. Like I'm going to literally go bust like $0 to my name trying to make this happen. Cause that's I want it that much. I think I'll be that good at it. And I truly believe this is going to be as disruptive as, I think it's ended up being, and it will continue to be. And I was like, and I want to be on this ride. Like I want to be a part of this. I think, it's really interesting. I want to help build this out.
Wow.
I want to work through oil and gas producers that like, I want to be, in the know with the oil and gas producers that do this. And I want to see how well they fare against the guys that don't, and I want to be able to tell that story. And so end of the day, he brought me on like, kind of like a part-time deal. And then I treated it like it was full-time before he even hired me. And, I never gave him a resume. Like I just worked. And so, then, and I was very ignorant even at that point, and he knew it. And I wasn't worth a very great salary, but since then, right, it's been what, 40 something months, since I officially started. I mean, my oil and gas IQ has probably quadrupled, probably doubled or tripled in the last 90 days. We brought on this guy named Jack Conley, who's amazing. And I just sit there and listen to him all day on calls. Questions get asked and I just wait for Jack to answer and I just take notes because he's so sharp. And so I get to be around all these really, really ambitious engineers, these young, hungry guys that are trying to change the world and trying to do something, trying to be disruptive. And I get I get to suck it all in, right? I get the benefit of all that, which is really cool. Plus it's a lot of fun, right? I get to do projects with oil and gas producers, and I get to teach them why they're like some of the best Bitcoin miners on earth. And they had no idea that they are. And I get to enlighten them, like, guys, listen, you guys are going to crush in this game. Like you already have all the expertise you need. The computer side, like computer stuff, that's like maybe 2% of this game. You know, like the name of this game is power generation. It's energy production. It's engines. It's maintenance. It's mechanics. Like you guys know that game. You're already the best. I know Bitcoin miners that give their left foot to have your knowledge, to have your experience. You're going to be able to obtain their knowledge, and like, you know, with 10 hours on the phone with me, I'm going to get you up to speed there, and then you're going to be off and running. And that's what's happened. So it's exciting, right? Like, I mean, I certainly didn't, you know, it's like one weird thing to another. This isn't what I thought I was going to be doing out of college. Like I had totally different plans for my life, and yet this is what I fell into.
Wow. I think those engineers are pretty fortunate to have you in the room. Your energy, your gravity towards learning something new has made you absolutely brilliant in the space, and it's impact. You can tell by your follows on Twitter. You can tell by your content that you continue to just spill out. Like imagine the stuff, as much as you spill out, imagine the stuff that's still inside your head that you're not.
Oh yeah, well, there's so much I can't share, right? There's so much I can't share,
for sure.
I would love to,
for sure.
But no, that's very kind of you to say.
I think this is get rich, die trying, the Bitcoin edition. I mean, when even your statements like, hey,
get employed, die trying, the Bitcoin way, right?
I think we need to call 50 up. We have a sequel.
God, if I could get on the phone with 50, what a time. All I would ask him is, like, are you going to do a concert with Trump? Because of that whole, you know, the Many Men song, dude. Many Men has been a blast forever, right? If you haven't worked out to Many Men, like, I don't think we have much to talk about. So funny that people started putting that together. I thought it was the funniest thing ever. Like, whether you hate or love Donald Trump, it's just like, that is why the internet exists, for this amazingness, you know.
I think that applies to him and you, but continue. You were going to say something?
No, I was going to say, I mean, it's kind of you to say. I think a big part of it is, you know, what I talk about this often. I'm open about this. Like, humbling myself has been the best education decision I've ever made, right? Like, and like, it's a daily deal, right? To just remind myself, like, one, I'm not the smartest guy in the room. Like, I have way more to learn than I already know, right? Like, I should be listening more than I'm talking. I should remember how awful life was in a cubicle, but beyond that, like, think about how awful life could be, right? Like, think about, I mean, I could be born, you know, I could have been born in like Nigeria or in Gaza, right? Like, yeah, like life could be a lot different. And most of it's been out of my control. And so just like, you know, I think everybody focuses on this stack sats part of Odell's sign off, but I obsess over the stay humble side. Like my mantra is, you can either, you know, stay humble or get humbled. Like, that's how the universe will humble you if you don't do it yourself. So like, daily, I try to remind myself, like, one, I busted my ass to be in this position. Like, I wanted this. Don't spoil it. Right? Like, don't, you know, celebrate it, right? Like wake up happy, you know, don't be pissed off about this person that ghosted you and then wanted to reschedule. Like, remember when you just were dying for somebody to even want to be on your calendar, you know what I mean? So staying humble is a big part of it. And then Steve has done an amazing job putting very smart people on the team, like, very tactfully. And I get the benefit from that. Like, that's, you know, if you look at like a CEO or a president or a founder or whatever as kind of like a general manager of a baseball team, or a, you know, kind of like a coach of a sports team, the goal is to bring people together that not just complement each other, that they challenge each other. Like, you know, that this person will be able to listen to this person, and this person will be patient enough to teach this person, even though this person, you know, like one thing about Jack Conley, who's on our team now, he's so patient with me. I know I'm asking him stupid questions, like questions. Like, he doesn't get paid enough to answer my stupid questions, but he sits there and he walks me through spontaneous combustion, this thing called knock, right? When you have hot gas in an engine, and why messes up the engine timing and therefore why it derates the engine's power output. And like he steps me through the actual, kind of the chemistry and the mechanics of it, the physics of it. And like it makes me a much better agent of the company. It makes me more equipped to do my job. And like there was no direction to have this happen. It's just, it's one of those things where like Steve saw that like Adam wants to know more and he should know more. He'd be better. I need to find somebody that knows more, is willing to be patient with Adam, and Adam could teach him, I could teach Jack a ton about mining and the economics and what's, pragmatic and why you don't want to deploy S17s or, things like that. Right. And we're going to complement and like crush together. Same thing with Jeff Reed, right? It's the guy we brought on from Mesa Solutions. And so Steve, it's still so early. That's the thing I keep telling people is it's still the top of the first inning. It might feel late, 60 whatever $1,000 Bitcoin. It's too expensive now, right? That unit bias is strong. I would argue it's like we're still in the midst of that flash in the pan. Like it's the start. We're still at the start. I mean, the first million blocks are truly like the beginning of this network. I'd even say the first million and a half, 2 million blocks are early. Right? This is supposed to be a 100 million block process, right? So it's still very early in Bitcoin. It's still very early in how Bitcoin mining disrupts energy production, power generation, all that stuff. Like there's no shortage of things to build and problems to solve. It's very early. It's very new still.
I think you can even notice how new it is. Just if you were, people want to compare Bitcoin. If you were to, which is not, but if you could compare it to a stock, it's just so funny how its volatility and yet still the massive unit bias. No other investable asset has those characteristics. When you think about its volatility, you would compare it to early Microsoft, early Amazon, early Tesla, even.
Almost probably like private, like when those companies were like still private if they had a stock ticker. Like that's
barely, this private, like about to go public, maybe not even IPO'd yet. Exactly. And then it's also $1 trillion asset. It's $1.5 trillion asset, 60 something thousand, hit 70,000. So when you think about when it's supposed to actually settle down, where is this network going to be? When is it going to turn into an IBM? Like that many multiples of just from a fiat valuation. It's like it's breaking the whole scale, and people don't have that concept because they see unit bias. It's like, oh, it's already expensive. I need to go somewhere else. But then they say it's volatile, and they can't put two and two together. Like the volatility and maybe there's something, maybe the unit bias, maybe the unit of account is wrong, and people aren't figuring that out yet. But because Bitcoin is essentially congruent, how would you describe it? Bitcoin and energy. If you could use one word to describe Bitcoin is to energy, what would you say? Is blank to energy, or energy is blank to Bitcoin? How would you correlate them?
I would say that Bitcoin is the commodity most intertwined, or the commodity most described by energy, right? Like that's where it gets even different than like an IBM or a.
That's right.
Or I was thinking, what's Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway? Right? Like they have like crazy. Isn't their stock price like 600 grand or something?
They never.
I don't know. I don't own it. So
yeah.
But it's a commodity. It's not like IBM or Amazon. It's like copper.
It's not an equity. That's right.
Or salt, or oil.
That's right.
And while it's like all of those, it's unlike them in a very important way, which it has a perfectly inelastic production schedule. And that is, humanity has never dealt with that, right? Like that's the thing that keeps a real big fire inside of my chest about when I really think about these things, right? Like, for example, let's say, Ulrich, like let's say the price of salt went to $50,000 a pound tomorrow. Okay.
We're 50 grand a pound. More salt.
Well, no, mine more shit. I'm going to go boil seawater. I'll collect my sweat for 50 grand a pound.
That's right.
Are you kidding me? I'm going to buy a workout bike and I'm going to sweat salt out of my own body. I'm going to be eating saltine crackers and I'll go boil seawater, and everyone will. And what's going to happen? That means everyone's going to be producing salt, and it's going to put down.
We're going to be all wearing doom suits, right? Those
So,
desert suits, yeah.
Well, effectively, right? But like, what's that going to do to what's that going to do to the next 6 months of salt production? It's going to go through the roof, and that's going to have downward pressure on the price.
That's right.
Bitcoin could be $5 million tomorrow. No more of it's getting produced.
We know all the way out.
There is no downward pressure function. There's the only downward pressure function is the already available supply of this commodity to be market sold.
That's right.
Right. For another commodity. It could be a terrible commodity like the US dollar. Right.
That's right.
Or maybe something else.
It could be a house, it could be a car, or it could be fiat. But either way, it's an opt-in network. But
like importantly, as a commodity, I mean, in my opinion, like Bitcoin is a commodity first, right? Like in order for something to be money, money is always the commodity best suited, like the most ubiquitous, commodity that's best suited for trade, right? It's the one people always say, it's identifiable, it's verifiable, it's divisible, right? It's transferable. All those characteristics that gold meets other,
to a degree,
the dollar doesn't meet in many ways, but like first, in my opinion, money is a commodity, and then it becomes something that, and as a commodity, it will always store value, right? It may not be the best at it, but the better it is, the better fit it is to become the commodity best suited to be money, right? Like storing value is a big part of it. Again, identifiability, verifiability, transferability, all that stuff. What commodity is best for that? Is it cinnamon? Is it oil? Right? Is it salt? Is it aluminum? I'd argue it's Bitcoin. I think that Bitcoin is the commodity best suited to be money. It's best suited for the world to use as that unit of account to simplify trade so that we can all scale. So we don't have to try to figure out how many chickens, values for how many pairs of tennis shoes, right? Like we can efficiently organize as human beings over value by using this like very, very auditable, highly precise supply commodity, right? And this thing that just really has no other use case other than to be the commodity best suited for money. Like it just happens to be like the reason it was designed and created, right? And so no wonder it's the best one. It's the ways in which it's intertwined and dependent upon, or at least tied to thermodynamic law is vital, right? I mean, again, this commodity can't be just blown up, right? We can't find a meteor with a bunch of it and it would, destroy like it's sound in that way. No matter how many people come to produce it. I mean, think about like how much the network has grown, even just like the last 3-4 years. I mean, it's like 7x or something, right? Like we were at like 180 exahash, I think in 2021 or so. Like we're at like 600 now, so like 4 or 5x. It hasn't changed the supply schedule hardly at all. I mean, even from the first block to now, we're only like 1.7% more Bitcoin have been produced than would have been projected. Right? Like that's the thing about the mathematical aspect of the difficulty and diminishing supply is even with insane network growth, you can be plus or minus 1.5%, 2% of 50 years in the future. This is how many are going to exist. This is the amount that I have relative to the total. I can't be. I'm not going to be diluted more than this, right? No matter what happens to the network. So, like there's no commodity like that, right? We might just find it a massive deposit of hydrocarbons or of salt or of gold. A meteor might just land on Earth that just like destroys gold or precious metal supply. Like this is like commodities really the game in my mind. And the cool thing is I already work with guys that know what producing commodities is like, right? They see the analog, they see the parallel and the very similar aspects. And then I enlighten them. I'm like, hey, if oil was $10,000 a barrel tomorrow, what would that do to the next 6 months of oil supply? And they're like, oh, it would, like the Saudis would open their taps. Everybody, people would be paying pumpers, $500 an hour. Everybody would be moving jobs to produce oil and gas. And it would.
Gavin Newsom may change his perspective on those.
His the lobby would be able to spend more, right? The lobby would be better financed. All of a sudden, they're buying politicians, changing their minds. That doesn't happen with Bitcoin. And when I tell this to oil and gas producers, they're like, what? I'm like, yeah, like doesn't, like it could be $2 million tomorrow. Like the exact same amount's getting produced. It's all about how many people are producing it and how many, ways in which that pie is getting split. And they're like, I mean, that's a shock, right? Like, and it's not just a shock to them. This is a shock to humanity. Humanity has, this is what I'm trying to say is like, we have never seen this in the history of fucking ever. Have we seen a commodity that's like this, that behaves this way? We've talked about it in economics class. It was always hypothetical and theoretical. And then this happened. And now all of a sudden it's real. Like it's actually perfectly inelastic. We cannot influence marginal supply. It has pure slippage. It's single side function, right? It's demand function commodity. Like, and we're only like 13, 14 years in. Like, what the fuck's more exciting than that right now in the world? Like maybe relanding rockets. Okay. Like, okay, that's pretty cool. Like, I think that's pretty sweet. From an engineering perspective, pretty kick ass. But
the idea that even that comparison, like landing rockets or even AI, and the idea is that
AI is not that interesting to me. I don't think so. But yeah,
well, some people think it. The idea is that any person can be a part and can have a share, can be a part of this movement of this novel technology. And it's not monopolized by one entity, and it's completely optional. And you can choose to play, or you can choose to stay away. And that's something that the internet didn't have, that engines didn't have, the automobile didn't have. There was always a small group that could benefit from this novel technology. For the first time ever, any and all people, anybody, I don't want to say all, anyone can benefit from this new technology. It's a beautiful thing. Do you see that dynamic as a differentiating factor with all the other technologies that we've discovered in the past?
Oh yeah, of course. And even beyond that, I'll go one step further, right? So this is where it gets even more fun. Is again, because we're talking about a perfectly inelastic supply. What economics would teach us is that price equilibrium or equilibrium of the market will land where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. And what that means is scale is punished. This is the most ubiquitous good. And scale is absolutely punished. Think about it this way, right? It's like simple math. Let's say the whole network was 10 exahash, right? Like let's just say in a hypothetical world, all the mining in the world was 10 exahash. So 10 exahash was deriving 100% of the mining rewards, divided however many ways. If you brought 10 exahash to the table, right? If you had 0 and then all of a sudden you bring in 10, you just brought in the entirety of the network. So now the network's at 20 and you have 10. So you brought in 10 exahash. And what did you get as a reward? You got 50% of all the Bitcoin mining rewards, right? Let's do it one more time. So then let's say that the next month you bring in another 10. So now you're 20 and the rest of the network's 10. So you're 2/3. So that first 10 exahash got you 50% of network rewards. The next 10 exahash, you
doubled your input, yeah, and you did not.
The next 10 exahash moved you from 50% to 66.
That's right, 16% more.
Like you're 2/3. You're 20 out of 30, right? So you went from being 50% to 10 out of 10 to 20 out of 30, right? Or 10 out of 20 to 20 out of 30, right? And so your first 10 exahash, you're rolling in it, right? Your second 10 exahash, you get nothing. You get shit. Right? So scale is punished, and that's a feature, not a bug. In fact, that means that the economic forces will not push consolidation of Bitcoin miners and Bitcoin production. It will not just land in one winner will take all, one public company will take all. No.
That's right.
In fact, the guys that are best fit, this is what I talk about all the time, right? Is guerrilla miners shall inherit the earth, right? Blessed are the guerrilla miners. Blessed are the less than 5 megawatt, because they're not drinking their own milkshake. Right? Like if you just keep bringing on exahash, you start drinking your own, you're competing with yourself effectively, right? Like you're diluting yourself. And so, there's a point where it's like, should we even expand? Like, nah, like I think we're strong as hell at, 5 megawatt. And then the price of Bitcoin maybe changed. Okay. Now we might push up a little bit, right? Like it's painful to scale in Bitcoin, in mining. And I think, and that's a feature, that's a great thing. That means that there will be tons of very small, less than 10 megawatt guerrilla miners that are rigorously, and they're actually competing better than the guy with multiple, like every terahash is actually worth more to them. and they've got lower time preference, and they've got less overhead, and right, they don't have 401ks and healthcare to pay at the end of the month, right? Like they can hold, they can battle. They're not publicly traded, right? They're not going to get sued by shareholders. They're savvy, right? So that's a good thing. Like, and this is global, right? So, I mean, I talked with Pierre Rochard recently. One of my favorite people, like the first person I ever listened to in Bitcoin, an amazing mind. I can't speak highly enough about the guy. And you know, we like kind of ran out of time, and I didn't want to bust his chops, but I'm really curious to hear, like, you know, how did some of these big miners think about that? Like, is it purely a financing game? Is it just, I mean, by the way, they are very creative. Like Riot is incredibly savvy and creative with how they structure power contracts and the ability to resell, and like they have optionality. I mean, they're, you know, rational market actors, but I don't think everyone's like them, right? I think a lot of this is just kind of like, you know, lever up money, deploy, you know, try to get these economies of scale. And I'm sitting here like, I think there's diseconomies of scale. Like the bigger you try to go, the more expensive it kind of, like, yeah, you might save a little bit on the hardware, on at least the miners, but power generation's tough the bigger you get. Like operational costs are a nightmare the bigger you get. Like staying small and nimble is kind of, and in my opinion, where the game's at. Like I think there's plenty of wealth to be made by these guys that are humble about their approach, right? They recognize that, you know, maybe 0.5 megawatt, 1 megawatt is awesome. Like for, you know, I don't have to hire any other employees. I can handle it myself, right? Like those kinds of things. That's a good thing. That means that we'll have a very robust global network. There won't be central points of attack with hash power. I would still like to see more pools, but you know, can't have everything.
Right. Another conversation for another time.
Yeah, it's still early, right?
You quoted the Beatitudes, and you said, and the guerrilla miners shall inherit the earth. Blessed are the guerrilla miners.
Guerrilla, as in guerrilla warfare, right? Like GUERILLA. Yeah.
Right. And it's like the dynamic, and you know, like Hodl Tarantula, you know, is a builder of those types of miners, and it's just like I see those projects just popping up everywhere. And of course there's the marathons, there's the clean sparks and riots. They do what they do, you know, pluses and minuses with all of them, but the network is truly incentivized to be a place where individuals can act out and prosper. And even when it comes to the nodes, where it's like your vote is just as important as Michael
Nobody's
Saylor's.
special,
and
nobody's special in this game. Yeah, nobody's special. Doesn't matter if you're friends with Jerome Powell or not, right? And that's
they
the
don't
key.
Figure that out.
Well, but that's like, while that's a beautiful thing with this game, it's often what I think people don't, or maybe they just miss, or you know, maybe they don't want to talk about, is what's so abhorrent and crooked about the fiat game, is that the money printer breaks all market signals. Like right now, if you were to put a poll on Twitter, like what is the most efficient way to produce power or energy, right? There'd be people out there be like, oh, it's solar. Oh, it's wind. The cost is this. Oh no, it's this. It's coal, right? And literally my answer would be, depends on who your friends are. Depends on if you've got that regulatory approval. It depends on if you're getting
all regulations.
It depends on if you're getting Section 4 of, you know, the Inflation Reduction Act, and you're getting $3.5 million per megawatt of carbon, sequestration credits, right? Like it depends on how close you are to the money printer, in other words. And what that means is nobody can find regulations. Yeah, like thermodynamic law be damned. It doesn't matter how thermodynamically efficient you are. The money printer trumps that shit, right? I mean, I was on stage in Miami. We were talking about this exact subject, right? And somebody, you know, one of the guys, total awesome dude, name's Ari, and very brilliant guy, engineer. He was talking about how a coal plant was shuttered in Canada, and how it was, you know, they were replacing it with like a nat gas plant initially, and then maybe nuclear. And I made the point to stop, and I was like, hold on, like, did that coal plant just go out of business because it couldn't cut it? Because it just wasn't efficient enough, or did or did a gang come in with guns, you know, also known as the state? Did they come in and say, hey, we're going to make you unprofitable, we're going to punish you and penalize you out of business, right? And meanwhile, we're going to give all these subsidies to these other guys that we think, you know, are greener, right? And really, it's not about that. It's just, we're friends with these guys, we don't really like you. So, right? Like, so do we have a market where the best are winning? Or do we have a market where winners and choosers are picked, no matter how thermodynamically efficient, no matter how appropriate, no matter how, you know, resilient or robust? And that that breaks everyone's spirit. It doesn't matter how much analysis you do. It doesn't matter how much time you spend looking at things. This money printer breaks, it's like, what should a bag of bread cost today? Nobody fucking knows because it's insane. The cost of money is zero. It's like, well, depends on if the bread is, emergency support for some like community that it's zero. But it's like, it's chaos. And that's what fiat breeds. That's what having the ability to create money at no cost does, is it destroys the world, right? Like, and that's as simple as it is. That's where this fix the money, fix the world kind of deal comes from. As grandiose as that sounds, and how, talk about delusions of grandeur, right? It's actually quite real, right? Like, we need, the United States government can drop bombs on people 15,000 miles away, cost them nothing. I mean, should violence be free? Like, you can argue whether or not the bomb should have been dropped or not in whatever situation, sure. But I think we should all agree it shouldn't cost nothing, right? Like, abhorrent violence like that should be costly, right? There should be a monetary cost. No, they just go to the money printer, just like move, a decimal and just shoot it over to freaking, Lockheed Martin or Raytheon, and a freaking $80 billion thing takes off with $30 billion bombs, just right? And these guys get, so now war doesn't just cost nothing. It gets people rich. So now we're not,
and bread costs more.
Exactly.
While that happens.
Right? Like, so it's breaking the world, and it breaks individuals. As Americans, we get broken the least. We are the least supplanted, right? Because we are a lot closer to the money printer than Yemen or Argentina, right? Everyone's still subject to the gangster gang that is the United States government. I love Bitcoin because it doesn't care who or how or what produced a kilowatt hour. Everybody's the same. Everybody's treated, nobody's special, right? And I think that's like the first, I can't think of another industry, another game where the playing field is that level. Shit, a BitAxe, right? Shout out to the BitAxe guys. I love them. Dude found a block, right?
That's right. Right before the conference.
In what world, other than Bitcoin mining, would the multi-billion-dollar companies lose out on any block, any marginal production to some dude with like $165 of hardware and like, a USB charger's worth of power? They won't allow it. They would not allow it, right? Like, McDonald's will not let you sell one hamburger without them getting a kickback. Like you have to come in huge to even just barely survive. And a badass with $150 took a block from everybody. Like, fuck yeah. Like, that's a fair world. Like, that should fire everybody up, whether it was your BitAxe or not. That should fire you up to produce some hash rate. Like, I will always push some of my hash rate to solo mining. I will always play that game because it's the fairest lottery to ever exist, right? Like, it's numbers, it's statistics, but everybody knows, man, like, sometimes you flip a coin and it's like 160 times in a row it's heads. Like, it's like very unlikely, but shit happens. And this is a fair statistical game. Play it. Like, in that regard, it's really hard to argue against mining. And that's where I think once we're truly commoditized, your toaster could be mining, right? Like, you need heat. So you might as, your toaster might as well produce. Like, shit, Steve Barber wrote this, I think back in 2018 or 2019. Like, every time your car hits the brakes, there's so much wasted freaking heat energy and wasted momentum. You spend all this power, all this gasoline to get up to speed, and then you hit the brakes, right? And just burns out in friction and heat energy. Like, you might as well have a freaking chip just spool up in that moment you hit your brakes, kind of like regenerative braking, right? Like, have it spool up just in that moment and throw some hash power, right? Like, you might as well. Why not? Like, once the thing is fully commoditized, once the chips are truly, everybody's playing with the same tools, like, we have pushed those bounds all the way. Like, miners should be in everything, right? Like, it should be the standard, because the cost will be simple, the form factor will be ubiquitous, right? And so, like, what a game, like, what a world where everyone's producing the money, right? Even if they might not even know it, right? It just like becomes part of their little deal, right? It just becomes part of the financing on the car or whatever, right? So, like, that's that's really how this is going to play out, because we've never seen, I mean, you have to really start getting first principles and look at how disruptive this is. The sad part is it really it enlightens me to how terrible money at no cost is. Like that, nothing angers me more, man. I get sick. Like I think it's slavery. It's monetary slavery. Like we should all recognize we are slaves today. And the good news is we can opt out. But we're still slaves. Like we are still subject to this game where these special unelected guys get to create money at no cost whenever they damn well please, to spend on whatever they damn well please. You know, in these congressional bills that are like 87,000 pages and you have like 3 hours to review it. You know, you have to read like 75,000 words per minute just to review the thing. In that regard, I like AI. AI can spill through a freaking congressional bill in 2 seconds and give you all the highlights. Like that actually might have a sweet impact. But you know, the world is mean right now because the United States creates money at no cost, and nobody, you know, we didn't all stand up and say, no, this is bullshit. Like you can't do that. We're not going to use your dollar, because everybody was, you know, too busy trying to live life. So, you know, it's like they didn't want to start a revolution. They should have. In 1972, like it should have happened day one. Like Nixon got off the gold standard. We should have been stand up right then and there. But at least now we've got Bitcoin, and it's a non-violent way to protest. You just opt out. I'm just not going to use your shit. You're going to die from obsolescence, right? We're going to obsolete you because you're just such a horrible option, relatively speaking. We're just not going to use you. I think that's a better way. If I'm going to participate in a revolution, I'd prefer it be nonviolent, right? So that's a sweet option. But let us not mistake how gross the game is and why we needed this. All right, this isn't just about cool tech. This isn't just about market cap, and like this is about disrupting that which is wrong. It's immoral. It's unethical. It's unfair. Like let's bring fairness back into the world. Let's, you know, we can all play our part in that role. I mean, I talk to oil and gas producers about this stuff. So many of them are so open to this. They're like, it's bullshit. Like, you know, it's bullshit that, you know, and I give them facts that they didn't know, and they go Google them. I say things like, you know, 80% of dollars were created after 2019, 70% of dollars created after 2019. And it's true. Right? Like we literally it's nuts. And they're like, what? Like, I'm like, yeah, go look at it. Like, here's a Fred chart, right? Here's an, you know, like here's M0, M1, M2. And they're like, I knew it was a scam, but I didn't know how bad, you know? And I'm like, it's only going to accelerate. You know, like this is why you're smart for at least producing oil. I like this far more, in my opinion, it's far more useful than the dollar, far more scarce, proof of work behind it. But you should also look at Bitcoin, right? Because you're going to be great at that too. And next thing you know, they're like, shit, this is a better money, right? Like this is an oil that I can store in my head. I can carry with me anywhere. I can send across the world at almost no cost, right? Like it starts becoming very pragmatic and familiar to them quite quickly. It's not super techie, you know, stuff. It's like a pragmatic solution to a shitty, messed up economic world that we live in.
Adam, you know, this was one of my easier interviews because you had so much to share. Again, get rich or die trying. You get into the philosophy. You get into the oil and gas industry. I can't thank you enough for coming on the show. I want to talk about Upstream Data, but I think there's going to be an Adam O part 2 ASAP. And
yeah,
but anyways, thanks.
Would happy to
go ahead. No,
and thanks for having me, man. I mean, you were very flexible with me. We were supposed to have this, like, I think like a week or two ago. And so thank you for being flexible. No. I wanted to get on. I meant it when I said I was down to do this. I've listened to a lot of your Money Matters, so.
You're a star. You're a stud. You're killing it on Twitter. And it's like for me to be now talking with you and just hearing the depth of your knowledge and passion, it's clear to me that the Bitcoin space, we always say, like, no, Bitcoin doesn't need anyone, but I will say that Bitcoiners absolutely need your voice. So I thank you. I thank you for sharing your voice on this show. And I look forward to talking to you soon.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Rourke. Thanks you.
Right on. So that was Adam for episode 18. Again, the episode right after the Bitcoin conference in Nashville. I was floored. I was shocked. I didn't have to say shit really because he brought the heat. So I thank him, and I thank you guys for watching. Tune in next week where we'll have another brilliant Bitcoin guest. I am Sir Ulrich, like my father before me. See you next time.